Can the final words of a teenager carry more weight than the rope placed around her neck? On the morning of February 8, 1943, a 17-year-old girl stood beneath a crude gallows in the village of Bosanska Krupa. Around her were German soldiers and local collaborators, all pressing her to betray her fellow fighters. Her refusal would later be remembered as one of the most unyielding acts of defiance during World War II. Lepa Radić was born in 1925 in the village of Gasnica, near Bosanska Krupa in northwestern Bosnia. She was only 16 when Axis forces invaded Yugoslavia in April 1941, carving the country into occupied zones and puppet states. Among them was the independent state of Croatia, a fascist regime controlled by the Ustase, which declared authority over the region and launched a campaign of ethnic cleansing against Serbs, Jews, and Roma, an extermination effort that claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. Across Bosnian villages, entire families vanished into camps such as Jasenovac, where Ustase guards carried out killings so savage they disturbed even some German officers. For Lepa and countless other young Yugoslavs, the decision was stark: accept occupation and genocide, or resist. She chose resistance, joining the Yugoslav Partisans, the communist-led movement under Josip Broz Tito that had become the most formidable force opposing Axis rule. Unlike other resistance organizations, the Partisans enlisted women not just in auxiliary roles, but as armed combatants. Lepa served as both courier and fighter, carrying messages between units, moving weapons, and taking part in attacks against German and Croatian forces. In the harsh landscapes of western Bosnia, where mountains and dense forests offered concealment, the Partisans survived by staying mobile, relying on local support and exploiting their deep familiarity with the terrain. She was hunted after the Kozara Offensive. The Battle of Kozara, fought from June to July 1942 across Mount Kozara and its surrounding valleys, was among the most devastating operations of the occupation. German General Franz Bohm, leading the 342nd Infantry Division alongside Ustase units and collaborating Chetnik forces, initiated Operation West Bosnia to destroy partisan resistance and secure vital mining and agricultural areas. More than 40,000 Axis troops were unleashed against roughly 3,500 partisan fighters who were also shielding nearly 60,000 civilians fleeing Ustase massacres. The campaign descended into slaughter. German forces adopted scorched earth tactics, torching villages suspected of aiding partisans and executing civilians without trial. Ustase units followed with extreme cruelty, systematically targeting the Serbian population for annihilation. Outnumbered and critically low on ammunition, the partisans mounted a desperate defense while trying to shepherd civilians through narrow mountain passes. When the operation concluded in early July, German records acknowledged over 11,000 killed. The real number, counting civilians murdered by the Ustase, likely surpassed 20,000. Around 68,000 civilians, mostly women and children, were deported to concentration camps. Very few survived. Lepa Radić's unit was among those shattered during the Kozara Offensive. Amid retreat, encirclement, and confusion, partisan forces splintered into small groups, each attempting to evade capture while continuing resistance. For months afterward, the region was saturated with German and Ustase surveillance. Roadblocks appeared along mountain paths. Villages were infiltrated by collaborators. Informants were paid for tips on partisan movements. The net was closing. In late 1942 or early January 1943, the precise circumstances remain uncertain. Lepa's group was betrayed. Whether through an informant's report or sheer misfortune during a sweep, German troops and local collaborators encircled the unit near Bosanska Krupa. A brief firefight followed. Several partisans were killed, others fled into the forest. Lepa, possibly wounded or cut off from her escape route, was taken alive. She was only 17. Now the Germans and the Ustase held a living source of intelligence on partisan activity in the region, and they were determined to force her to reveal everything she knew. Interrogation showed no mercy. She was tortured for the names of partisans. Questioning began at once. German military intelligence, the WWII, alongside Ustase security forces, were hunting for details on partisan networks, safe houses, supply lines, hidden weapons, and the identities of village sympathizers. For occupying armies battling an enemy that blended into the civilian population, captured partisans were priceless sources of intelligence. Standard protocol demanded that every possible detail be extracted before execution. Lepa Radić was subjected to calculated, methodical torture meant to shatter her resolve. In occupied Yugoslavia, interrogation practices fused German precision with Ustase cruelty. Beatings were routine, often delivered with blunt tools to maximize pain while keeping victims conscious. Prisoners were denied sleep, leaving them confused and mentally exposed. Some testimonies indicate that Lepa was burned during questioning, though the full extent of her suffering remains unclear, reconstructed mainly from eyewitness accounts and post-war records. Her interrogators pressed relentlessly. Who in the villages fed the partisans? Where were the arms caches concealed? Who carried messages? What operations were being planned next? Each refusal was met with harsher punishment. Still, Lepa Radić gave them nothing, no names, no places, no intelligence that could endanger her comrades or the civilians risking everything to support them. Her silence was intentional, and it was remarkable. Most prisoners, after enduring sustained torture, eventually broke, offering at least fragments of information just to make the pain stop. The Germans and the Ustase were experienced interrogators. They knew how to push human endurance past its limits. Yet this 17-year-old partisan, beaten and burned, maintained complete silence on anything that could compromise the resistance. One witness later recalled that Lepa repeatedly insisted she would say nothing that might help the occupiers track down fellow partisans. Her captors finally understood that nothing useful would be gained from her. A decision was made to execute her publicly as a warning. Publicly hanged at the age of 17. Publicly hanged at the age of 17. Public executions in occupied territories were carefully calculated acts. They were not only punishment, but psychological warfare, designed to terrorize communities into submission and prove that resistance was futile. The Germans and their collaborators scheduled Lepa Radić's execution for February 8, 1943, in Bosanska Krupa, ensuring it would be witnessed by as many locals as possible. A gallows was erected in a central public space. Residents, many compelled to attend, gathered as German soldiers and Ustase militia sealed off the area. Lepa was led to the gallows. Her face bore the visible marks of torture. Witnesses described her as calm, even defiant, as she stood before the noose. The executioners, identified in different accounts as either German troops or Ustase collaborators, prepared the rope. Before carrying out the sentence, her captors made one final attempt. They offered her life. If she disclosed the names of her comrades and supporters, she would be spared. The crowd watched in silence as the teenage girl confronted her last decision. Her reply became one of the most iconic acts of defiance in Yugoslav wartime history. According to multiple witnesses, she declared, "I am not a traitor to my people. Those you ask for will reveal themselves when they succeed in wiping out all of you evildoers to the last man." The noose was tightened. No mercy followed. On February 8, 1943, Lepa Radić was hanged. Photographs taken by German soldiers at the execution site survived the war, later preserved as evidence of the brutality of Nazi occupation. They show a young woman, scarcely more than a child, standing beneath the gallows with striking composure in her final moments. Her death did not crush the partisan movement. Instead, her courage and sacrifice became a powerful symbol of Yugoslav resistance. The names she protected were never revealed. The networks she refused to give up continued their work. Less than 2 years later, partisan forces would free most of Yugoslavia, and many of those she died to protect would live long enough to see victory. In the years after the war, Lepa was elevated to the status of a national heroine in socialist Yugoslavia. Her name was given to schools, streets, and monuments. A photograph taken just before her execution was printed in textbooks, held up as a symbol of youthful bravery in the face of fascism. But beneath the layers of state propaganda rested a simple truth. A 17-year-old girl chose death rather than betrayal, shielding people she would never meet again. Her story compels us to question what we value beyond mere survival. When confronted with death, would we hold fast to principles that serve others instead of struggling only for our own lives? And when does silence itself become the strongest act of resistance? The rope that ended Lepa Radić's life was far weaker than the courage she showed by refusing it, a courage history preserved long after her executioners faded into dust.